All right, so get ready because today we are diving deep into the mind of Simone Weil with Gravity and Grace.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
This is a collection of her notes, and it is packed with really intense but surprisingly down-to-earth insights on human nature and suffering and, our search for something bigger than ourselves.
It's like this philosophical puzzle box,
Yeah.
all pieced together from her, like private thoughts. It wasn't really meant to be a straightforward book, so I think our job today is to make her ideas a little bit more accessible, a little more relatable,
Right.
while still honoring, like, how deep her thinking really is.
Yeah, so less of a textbook and more of a conversation with like a really brilliant friend.
Yes.
Who's maybe a little cryptic.
A little bit.
But let's be honest, who among us hasn't pondered these like huge existential questions at some point?
Totally.
It just goes about it in a really unique way.
Yeah.
So let's start with one of her central ideas, gravity, as a way of understanding human tendencies.
Yeah, it's not just about, like, physical gravity, right?
Yeah.
She's suggesting we have this kind of internal pull, this downward force
Yeah.
that influences how we have relationships and the choices that we make.
Yeah.
And even how we deal with suffering.
So it's almost like we're like predisposed to take the easier path.
Yeah.
Even if it's not the best one.
Right.
It's like when we're feeling needy and instead of like reaching out for support, we push people away.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Weil calls this human mechanics, like we're on autopilot,
Okay.
just following this set pattern. But here's the thing. She doesn't believe that we're trapped.
Right.
This pattern is natural,
Okay.
but not inevitable.
Okay, so there's a way to break free from this gravitational pull.
Totally.
I'm definitely sensing a but how coming on.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, I want to ask about another idea that jumped out at me. This void inside each of us that we're constantly trying to fill. It's almost like she's describing this feeling of emptiness
Yeah.
that we try to cover up with all sorts of stuff.
It's
Yeah.
like an incredibly powerful image. She sees us clinging to, like, possessions, relationships, even our own identities, like we're trying to plug up this hole with things that can never truly satisfy.
Right.
It's as if we're looking for lasting fulfillment in things that are so temporary.
It's like trying to solve a thirst problem with like salty snacks.
Right.
No matter how much you munch, the thirst is still there.
Right.
And she has some pretty striking examples of this, right? Like dwelling on the past or obsessing over the future as ways of avoiding the present moment, the emptiness of now.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating is how she links this to the idea of illusion.
Okay.
We fool ourselves into thinking that these external things have inherent value, when the true value might be in something much deeper, something beyond our grasp.
So it's not that like these things are bad in themselves.
Right.
But it's our relationship to them that creates the problem.
Totally.
We're trying to fill an infinite void with finite things. It's like squeezing an ocean into a teacup.
You got it. And she even suggests that certain common religious beliefs, like the promise of immortality or the idea that sin has a purpose in God's plan, can become these kinds of fillers,
Okay.
leading us away from genuine spirituality.
Hold on, that's a pretty bold statement. Is she saying that these beliefs are inherently bad?
Not necessarily. What she's getting at is that sometimes even our religious beliefs can become a way of avoiding the hard work of confronting our own emptiness,
Okay.
our own need for something more.
So how do we break free from this cycle of like clinging and filling the void with things that ultimately don't satisfy? Weil's solution sounds pretty intense. Detachment.
She definitely does not mince words.
Yeah.
She talks about imagining the death of loved ones, picturing the loss of treasured possessions, things that most of us would rather not dwell on.
Yeah, no one wants to sit around like fantasizing about losing everything they care about.
Right.
But if I'm understanding her correctly, these thought experiments aren't about actual loss, right? It's more about changing how we relate to things, our perspective.
You're spot on. Weil isn't advocating for coldness or indifference. She's suggesting a deeper way of seeing reality without our own needs and wants, like clouding our judgment.
It's like she's saying, don't avoid the hard stuff. The thought of losing what you love, like lean into it and see what that reveals about you. It sounds tough, but maybe there's a sense of freedom in that too, like a release from constantly needing to hold on to everything so tightly.
That's a really interesting point, and that's exactly what I was getting at. Detachment isn't about shutting down your emotions. It's about understanding the impermanence of things, the fact that everything changes.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it, but now I'm even more curious about how this connects to Weil's perspective on suffering, which seems to be a recurring theme throughout her work.
That's a great segue because suffering is a crucial part of Weil's philosophy, and her perspective on it is quite unconventional, to say the least.
I'm ready to have my mind blown. Lead the way.
Okay, so Weil, she doesn't shy away from the reality of suffering at all. Like, she suggests that it can be a source of knowledge, even giving us this sort of superiority over God.
Whoa, okay, hold on. Suffering gives us superiority over God. I mean, how does that work?
It's definitely like a paradox, but here's how she kind of breaks it down. God, being perfect and all-powerful, he doesn't experience suffering the way that we do. But humans, on the other hand, with all of our flaws and limitations, we're like uniquely capable of feeling the depths of pain and sorrow.
So, like, our human fragility, our capacity for suffering, actually gives us a different perspective, a type of knowledge that God in his perfection can't access.
That's a great way to put it. Weil believed that suffering, it like strips away our illusions, and it forces us to confront what really matters and reveals truths that might otherwise remain hidden.
This reminds me of something she wrote. To accept what is bitter, the acceptance must not be reflected back on the bitterness so as to diminish it. It's like she's saying, lean into the pain, don't try to sugarcoat it or explain it away.
And it's important to remember that Weil wasn't just like theorizing about suffering. She experienced a lot of it in her own life, both physically and emotionally.
Right.
She was a sickly child, a passionate activist who immersed herself in the struggles of the working class and ultimately chose to die of starvation in solidarity with those suffering under Nazi occupation.
That's incredibly powerful and definitely puts her ideas into a whole new light. But this idea of finding meaning in suffering, of suffering innocence leading to truth, it's still a lot to unpack.
It definitely is, and to understand it better, we need to kind of circle back to the idea of detachment. Weil believed that suffering can only be truly transformative if we don't try to escape it through the usual distractions, the things that we cling to in order to fill the void.
So instead of reaching for another bag of chips when we're feeling that emptiness, she's saying we need to sit with the discomfort, let it wash over us, and see what we can learn from it.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that suffering is an inherent part of the human experience. And instead of running from it, we could use it as an opportunity for growth and understanding.
All right, I think I'm starting to grasp that. But where does love fit into all of this, especially considering Weil's rather unconventional perspective on it?
Her view of love is definitely thought-provoking. One of her most famous and perhaps perplexing statements is that love is a sign of our wretchedness.
Okay, now that one really throws me for a loop. Love as a sign of our wretchedness. That doesn't sound very romantic.
It doesn't. But to understand it, we need to contrast human love with God's love. Wiles believe that God's love is perfect, self-sufficient, and complete.
Okay.
It doesn't need anything outside of itself. Human love, however, is always directed outwards. We're constantly seeking something outside of ourselves to complete us, to fill that void we talked about earlier.
So our love is a reflection of our incompleteness, our neediness. It's about trying to find something we lack in another person, in an experience, in something outside of ourselves.
Exactly. And while this seeking can sometimes lead us astray, cause us to cling to the wrong things, Weil also believed it could point us towards God if understood correctly.
So even though human love is flawed, it can still be a bridge to something greater, something transcendent.
Precisely. Weil talks about loving through and across destruction without consolation. She believed that true love isn't about comfort or ease, but about seeing the truth of another, even in their brokenness, and recognizing the divine spark within them.
Wow, that's a powerful way to look at it. It's not about finding someone to complete you, but about recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of the other, even in their imperfections.
And that's a great transition to another important aspect of Weil's thought, her critique of the social element in our lives. She wasn't exactly a fan of conformity or the pursuit of collective ideals.
From what I've read, she seemed pretty skeptical of anything that smacked of blind faith in progress or social movements.
You're right. In fact, she used this vivid image of the great beast to represent the dangers of the social realm. It's this force that she saw, tempting us with collective idols and substituting social conformity for true virtue.
It's interesting because on the surface, it might seem like she's contradicting herself. After all, she was deeply involved in social justice movements, even risking her own life to help others.
It's a great observation, and it highlights the complexity of Weil's thinking. What she was cautioning against wasn't social action itself, but the tendency to confuse social progress with spiritual growth. She believed they were often in conflict.
I see. So it's not about withdrawing from the world or ignoring injustice. It's about being aware of the potential pitfalls of the social realm and not letting it become a substitute for genuine spiritual seeking.
You got it. Well, she uses the history of Israel as an example. She argues that their focus on social and political power ultimately distracted them from their true spiritual purpose.
And she doesn't let the church off the hook either, right? She has some pretty strong critiques of organized religion as well.
Absolutely. And remember, you specifically requested a deep dive that didn't shy away from her more challenging views.
Right.
She warned against confusing the human institution, the church, with its spiritual essence, arguing that it too could become a tool of the great beast.
So she wasn't saying religion is inherently bad, but that we need to be careful not to let it become just another form of social control, another way of avoiding the real work of facing ourselves and our relationship with the divine.
Exactly. And this brings us back to her ideas about detachment and the void. We can't fill that emptiness with social approval, belonging, or religious dogma any more than we can with material possessions.
So where does that leave us? If we can't find fulfillment in the social realm and suffering is all around us, is there any hope for us?
Well, this is where Weil's perspective takes, like, a surprising turn. Despite her often stark assessment of human nature and the world we live in, she offers a glimmer of hope in her views on beauty.
Beauty. Now this I have to hear. How does beauty fit into all of this? Okay, so we talked about gravity and the void and suffering and love and even the great beast of the social realm. But now we're on to beauty. I have to admit, I'm a little lost on how this all connects.
Yeah, it might seem like a bit of a shift, but it's actually a really important part of her philosophy. She saw beauty as a sort of evidence, a sign that something divine can exist in the world, even amidst all the messiness.
So not just like pretty sunsets and cute puppies,
Yeah.
but something like deeper. Like beauty is proof that something bigger than us is at work.
Exactly. For a while, beauty was about experiencing a sense of transcendence, like a glimpse of something beyond our everyday understanding. And she pointed to art as like a prime example.
Okay.
Think about like a powerful piece of music or a really stunning sculpture.
Right.
Those things can really evoke a feeling of connection to something beyond ourselves.
It's like that awe feeling you get when you see the Grand Canyon or hear a piece of music that just moves you to your core. It's not just about like aesthetics, it's about experiencing something that feels both like really personal but also universally meaningful.
You're right on the mark.
Yeah.
And for Weil, paying attention to beauty was almost like a spiritual practice, a way to like break free from those ego-driven desires and connect to something larger.
So it's not just about appreciating beauty passively, but actively seeking it out, noticing it in unexpected places, and letting it like change how we see the world.
That's a great way to put it. And one of the most fascinating things about Weil's view of beauty is how she connected it to the idea of necessity and chance, working together. She saw beauty as this delicate balance between order and randomness, like a flower blooming in a cracked sidewalk.
That's a beautiful image and kind of sums up her whole philosophy, doesn't it? Finding meaning and even beauty in unexpected places amidst the chaos and suffering of life.
Absolutely, and I think that's what makes her work so powerful, even if it can be challenging at times. She doesn't offer any easy answers, but she encourages us to wrestle with those big questions, to confront those hard truths, and keep seeking, even when things feel bleak.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Simone Weil's Gravity and Grace, what's the takeaway for us non-philosophers? The everyday folks just trying to navigate life.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think Weil would be the first to say that her ideas aren't just for academics. They're for anyone who's ever felt, lost or confused or just overwhelmed by the complexity of existence.
It's like she's saying, look, life is hard. There's suffering, there's emptiness, there's this pull toward the easy way out. But there's also beauty, there's connection, and there's this potential for something more.
Exactly. And one of the most practical things we can take away from Weil is this idea of paying attention, of being present in the moment. Whether we're experiencing joy or sorrow, it's about noticing the world around us, the people we encounter, the beauty that often goes unseen.
And maybe it's about not being afraid of the hard stuff, the suffering, the void. Maybe those things are trying to teach us something too.
That's a great point. Val certainly believed that suffering, when faced with courage and honesty, could be a really powerful catalyst for growth and transformation.
So as we go about our lives, maybe we can carry with us this idea of detachment with love. Not detachment in the sense of being, cold or unfeeling, but detachment from our own ego, our need to control everything, our fear of loss, and instead approach life and each other with a sense of openness, curiosity, and a willingness to see the beauty even in the brokenness.
That's a beautiful way to sum it up. And remember, this deep dive is just a starting point. Weil's ideas are meant to be wrestled with, pondered, discussed.
So, to our listeners, we encourage you to seek out gravity and grace for yourself and really dive into the full depth of her thought. It might be challenging, it might make you uncomfortable, but it will definitely make you think.
And who knows, maybe it'll even help you see the world and your place in it with a little more clarity, a little more compassion, and maybe even a little more beauty.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into gravity and grace. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those aha moments that make life a little richer, a little deeper, and a little more meaningful.